Okay, everybody, welcome back. So in this section now, we're going to kind of pick up where we kind of left off the last section with the vocals, where we started to add some additional pieces of outboard gear in our virtual analog studio. If you remember in the last section, we added the Pultec EQ and we added the Moog EQ from Universal Audio to the lead vocal and to for the verse and the chorus. We also added a Fairchild compressor, again, to give the lead vocal a little bit of uniqueness that's different from the rest of the mix. So hopefully you've been watching this series in order, because I demonstrated some of this in the prior to the mixing part of this series and some of the plugin demo and comparison sections. And I also talked about it, quite a bit in the last section, but I'll say it briefly one more time in case you're watching these out of order. So the whole concept around having our extra pieces of outboard gear, like we would have in an analog studio where we had our SSL console, like we have in our virtual analog studio. And then we allowed ourselves a handful of pieces of outboard gear that would have been in that analog studio, that now we can decide where we want to patch those pieces of analog gear in to give the tracks some separation and some tonal uniqueness that's different from the rest of the mix. Because the majority of the mix is using the SSL EQs, the SSL compressors to kind of get everything sounding good. And we're using these other pieces of gear to kind of enhance things. So in the last section, if you remember, we put on, this is our de-esser, sorry. We put on our Fairchild compressor on our lead vocal. Again, we did a little bit of compression on the SSL channel strip, but then we followed it up with the Fairchild to kind of even out the performance and give it a little bit of that tone that we want. And then we also put on the Pultec EQ as well to kind of give it a little bit of top end so it wasn't so warm sounding. And then we even doubled up and stacked an EQ and put on the Moog EQ and used the famous Airband at 40K, which is unique to this EQ, to give it a little bit more top end to kind of open up the vocal where it doesn't really sound sibilant. And if you go back to the last section where I demonstrate, I kind of turn them on and off so you can kind of hear the difference. And that gives that vocal a little bit of more of a unique sound. So now this section, now that we've kind of got the whole mix kind of dialed in, so to speak, now we have a decision to make and some options to us. Where again, we said that we were going to allow ourselves an LA2A compressor as part of our virtual analog studio. We said we're going to allow ourselves two 1176 style compressors, a DBX 160, a Fairchild, which we've already used on the lead vocal, so we're not going to use it again anywhere else, and then a couple of LA3As if we choose to for compressors. And we also are going to allow ourselves, for an EQ point of view, we said a couple of Pultecs, which again, we've already used on the lead vocal, so we're not going to use those Pultecs again. We have a Moog EQ that we allowed ourselves on our list of extra pieces of hardware. Again, we use that on the lead vocal. We also said we're going to allow ourselves a Neve EQ if we choose to use it, an SSL EQ if we choose to use it, and that was it. So again, we have more compressors than we do EQs. But those are our select pieces of hardware. And so we've already used some of those, as I said. So now this is really where, and I talked about this early on in the series, where we talk about, especially compression. Let's think about compression for a minute, where now that we've got everything kind of already compressed on the channel strip and on the tape machine, right, and on the virtual console collection, that going forward, from this point forward, I start to think about the compressors not really as compressors, so to speak, where I'm looking to really control the dynamics of the performance, because I've already done most of that on the SSL channel strip, as you remember throughout this series. Even though the compression was pretty light, we've controlled and leveled off our performances as much as we wanted to using the SSL. Now what I'm thinking about with compression, this is where we start to talk about tone. And I talked a lot about this early on in the section, in the series, in the demonstration part of this. And if you've followed me on YouTube for any length of time, or if you've been involved in any one of my live streams on YouTube where we talk about compressors, I'm always talking about them as tone. Some people will call them tone boxes, and not thinking about them so much at this stage as a compressor, but what they can do tonally to some of your tracks to enhance it. Okay, sometimes we'll just take signal and run it through a compressor with no compression at all, just to get the tone, to set the uniqueness. And this is where you got to kind of have a shift in your thinking. And this is where, like in the demonstration part of this series early on in the first few sections, where you want to get yourself a handful of different types of compressors when you start getting into analog plugins that sound different from each other, and start to look at it and hear compression in that way. And for some people, that's an easy thing to kind of wrap their head around and to kind of get going in their mind. And for others like myself, especially when I first started, that is a completely foreign concept and a completely difficult thing. And if you have trouble hearing compression already, this compounds that problem. And this is why I said at the beginning of this series is really not for the absolute beginner of mixing. I'm assuming that you already have some of these compression techniques and concepts and skills with you. If you don't, that's okay. I still appreciate you purchasing this product. But like I said early on in the series, in the introduction part, you really want to go back and check out a product that I made called Compression Made Easy. Because Compression Made Easy, we do a lot of A/Bing, and I try to demonstrate and teach you how to hear compressors and the differences between them. Even though that product's a couple of years old at this point, it's still very, very valuable and still very, very relevant. And so I would absolutely go and check that out if you're new. If you're not new and you've been around a while and you understand compression and you got a pretty good handle on it, but you're just starting to get into these analog style compressors, like I said earlier, what you probably want to have in your toolkit is you probably want to have an LA2A or an LA2A style. You want to have an 1176 style compressors in your collection. You want to have a Fairchild and maybe some LA3A styles, because these all sound totally different from each other. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't make sense, or after you watch this series, if you're struggling with this, you can always email me through my website, and I'll try to help you privately if I can. But the best thing to do is to get a hold of some of these different style plugins that I'm showing you, and to go into your DAW and to put them solo up tracks and A/B these different compressors, and you'll start to hear the difference. And once that light bulb kind of goes off in your head and you hear it for the first time, and once you can hear it and you know how to listen for it, it's going to open up a world of possibilities for you to really help take your mixes to the next level, and to really help you use these analog style plugins that we're using throughout this series to really get your mix to sound not only more with that analog style flair, but just overall more professional to begin with. Okay. So now, having said all of that, I know you want to hear some stuff, but I really feel like I need to set up this with that kind of understanding. Okay. So hopefully that was clear enough. I hope so. Again, you can email me if you have any other questions. So now that we've kind of treated our lead vocal, now I have my other compressors and EQs, as we talked about. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to throw all of them on all these tracks. They're here if I feel like I need them. Now, over time, I've developed a workflow, and as I'm listening to the mix, and as you're listening to your mix, as you're mixing this song, there's maybe some things that'll stand out where you say, okay, I want to enhance this. The first thing I want to maybe do, now we're going to listen back to this section of music. The whole band is playing. I've kind of balanced everything. We're about 80% there. And let's listen back, and I'll let you in on, after we listen back to this section of music, what I'm kind of hearing and what I think I want to do. Okay, so now I got the mix. I'm kind of playing it back. I'm kind of balancing things. Okay, this is what I would be doing, and I'm listening now. I'm listening for tone, and I'm listening for, okay, what part of the mix can't I hear very well? What things are getting clouded up? What things do I want to try to enhance? I'm thinking these things. Can I hear all the instrumentation clearly? What do I want to try to work with? So here, let's listen to this, and then I'll tell you what I mean when the music stops.
Yes, I can remember you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. You'll see me running through the hayfields. That's
Okay, so what I'm listening for here, let's just talk about drums. So right away, this is a rock track, obviously, right? It's a guitar riffy track. The guitars sound nice and bright. They sound kind of full. I feel like I feel like the snare could be a little bit brighter. It could be a little bit more punchy because of the style of music that it is. Now, you may listen to that and say it sounds perfectly fine to you. You don't want to touch the snare. And that's totally fine. It's not bad. This whole section is very subjective, and it's very based on your taste, what you want to hear, maybe what your client wants to hear, and also your experience level and what you tend to go for as part of your signature sounds. Part of what we're developing here with these analog style plugins, especially in this section, is really developing your own unique sound as an engineer and how you like things. Do you as an engineer like to mix things with a much more warm feel? Or are you someone that likes to mix things with a more clarity and a little bit more crispiness feel, not so dark or warm, a little bit more top-endy? Are you someone that likes to have a mid-range heavy mix? Are you someone that tends to have to scoop out the mids a little bit, depending on the style of music you're working on? Okay, so a lot of this is personal preference and subjective. Okay, so what I'm showing you here and what I'm going to show you are just some ideas. Doesn't mean you have to do this on every single mix. It just means that you have to decide. I just want to show you how I'm approaching this, and then you have to take that information and sculpt it into your own workflow. Okay, so I want to hear a little bit more snare, a little bit more crack. Now, I could easily just go into the snare track or in the overhead track, and I could say, okay, open up my channel strip, and I can just turn up a little bit of EQ. On the overhead track, we already boosted up about 12K, about 6 dB to get a little more brightness. I could just jack that up a little bit more. Or what I could do, because the overhead is the picture of the entire kit as opposed to just the snare track, I can throw another analog EQ on here to kind of give it a little bit different flavor and to make the whole kit sound just a touch bit brighter. Okay, so for example, we already used our Pultec EQ, so I'm not going to use that again because that has its own special unique sound that I want it to be special for the vocals. But we also can use like a Neve style EQ, one that I really like, or an SSL style EQ, but we're already using an SSL on the channel strip, right? So let me just kind of throw an idea at you. So what maybe we'll do on this, let's just try this. So I may go to something like my Waves Shep 73, which is a 1073 EQ, which I use on overheads from time to time. We're going to make sure, again, we grab the stereo version of the plugin because I believe that's a stereo track, and it is. And we're going to drop it on at the very last here. And here's the Shep 73 by Waves. And great EQ to have. Maybe I just want to add a touch, just a touch of a little bit of brightness to get that snare to come out. Now, I've already rolled off the low end. I've already done all that stuff on my other EQ. If you remember the SSL, I'm already doing a low cut filter. I'm already taking out the cardboard sound at around 400. I just want to brighten this up a little bit. Okay, I want to give it its own little unique sound. So again, this may work, it may not work. We're going to try it. So over here at 12K, even though I've already boosted it up on the SSL, maybe what I'll do is I'll take it off the SSL and I'll add it on the Shep 73 instead. And let's see what that sounds like.
Yes, I can remember you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. I see me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change as far as I can remember. You never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just...
Okay, so hopefully you can hear there, when I bypass the plugin, the drums get a lot darker sounding, a lot warmer sounding. There's a lot more brightness to that snare, a little bit more crack when I give 4 dB at 12K. Okay, that's all I did here. I actually rolled off, I put the low cut at 80 Hertz, even though we already did that on the SSL. Okay, so now if I were to pin this and then put up the SSL, oh, I did this again the wrong way. I always do that, sorry. Let me pin this. Get both plugins on the screen. Okay. So now if you remember, we had 12K on the SSL and we did about 3 to 4 dB here, 5 dB. And we did a little bit of a shelf. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass the SHEPs. We have the same boost at 12K on the SSLs we do on the SHEPs. Let's see if there's any tonal difference. Does anything sound different to us? Again, we're just focused in on the snare primarily because that's where you hear it the most. So here's the SSL. Then I will turn off the SSL and I'll turn on the SHEPs just so you can hear the difference.
You just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you.
Okay, so I don't know what you can hear through the wonders of a video, but what I hear here in the control room is the SHEPs at the same boost has a lot more brightness to it than the SSL does. Now, as my next thought process is, well, the only other thing we did with EQ on the SSLs, we took out that mid-range, about 3 dB at around 400 hertz. So what if I did the same thing on the SHEPs and just used the SHEPs EQ as opposed to the SSL EQ? Does it sound any different? Does it give it a little bit more of a unique sound to it? Is it going to make those overheads stand out a little bit? Let's see. So over here, I'm going to go right around, let's see, we're going to take this, oops. So we're going to go around, we're around 300-ish, about 400, that's about 400 hertz, about 480 hertz. And we're going to take out, okay, so let's shut off the EQ on the SSL altogether.
No dress blowing in the wind. See me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. See me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. See me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think.
Okay, so whatever, not sure what you're hearing through the video, it's tough for me to tell. What I can hear here in the control room is that by doing the same kind of mid-frequency cut and the same kind of boost, that we have a tonal difference between this Neve and this SSL. The Neve seems a little bit more brighter, a little bit more crispy. The SSL seems a little bit more warm. So now you have a decision to make. I can say, well, I can maybe, what if I were to just not use the EQ on the SSL? Let's just use the EQ on the Neve. It's a different sound. Again, do we prefer that sound? Does it get the snare to cut a little bit more? That's what I'm listening for, because the snare is what I'm listening for.
I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. See me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change.
Okay, so can you hear the difference there in the snare drum? Okay, so I like the way the Neve is getting that snare to cut a little bit more without me having to turn up the overhead volume of the fader. I just want the snare to poke through a little bit more to drive the song a little bit more. Okay, and now this snare and these overheads haven't, from an EQ perspective, sound different than the SSL. Okay, so I'm shutting off the EQ on the SSL and I'm saying, okay, I want to go ahead and I want to stick with the Neve. Now, again, I don't do this on every single mix. I'm giving you examples of something to think about. Now we have, in this case, we have our overhead track sounds a little bit different. It's got a little bit of a unique flavor than the rest of the mix. Again, we have these elements of the elements of the mix that we're trying to get to stand out. So again, before this EQ, here's what we have.
As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can.
Okay, so hopefully you can hear the difference here. Our snare is cutting a little bit more now. Okay, so here's an example where I might use this. Okay, where I say, okay, I'm going to use this. Are there any other elements of the mix that I want to kind of have maybe stand out a little bit? Another area that I tend to sometimes go to is maybe the bass. Now the bass, again, we're using the compressor on the SSL.
You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose.
We're only doing about 3 dB of compression just to kind of control it. So now maybe I'm going to follow that up with an LA2A. An LA2A always sounds really good on bass, right? So we can use the Universal Audio, or the Waves makes them, the CLA2A. But we're going to grab a Universal Audio LA2A. Again, just add a little bit of color. I'm not going to want to over-compress the bass too much because we're going to talk about parallel compression soon enough. And we're going to over-compress the bass. But we're going to use something like the LA2, which is a version of the LA2A. It's the first version of it. And again, I showed this to you in the demo part of this series early on, a few sections back. This particular version of the LA2, before the LA2A, has a very slow attack. So it's a subtle compressor, which I really like, but it has a nice tone to it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on the bass, and again, I normally, like what you saw me do on the overheads, I do this in the context of the mix. I always do this in the context of the mix because I want to hear tonally if it's helping the mix. In solo, it really doesn't matter, but for this purpose, so you can hear the difference, I'm going to solo it up, okay? Because I want you to be able to hear it. Okay, so now we have our bass, and we're not going to do our bass grit track, we're just going to do the regular bass. Okay, so hopefully you can hear there. And again, this is fairly subtle, but what I'm listening for is more the top end, more the fingers, not really the bottom end so much, a little more the top end. One of the reasons why we added a grit track was to bring a little bit more of the top end out to cut through the guitars. This is going to help that even more. And it adds a little bit of a tone. Again, we're tone, or EQ. Think of EQ. Don't think about compression. I'm compressing this about 3 dB, a little bit more than that. On the heaviest notes, maybe 5 dB. So it's helping level out the performance a little bit more, because you remember on the SSL, we're only compressing about 3 dB. We're doing light compression on the channel strip. And the reason why we're doing it on the channel strip is because I knew, and I said this before, that by doing light amounts of compression on the channel strip, it allows me to come in and use these other tonal compressors to not have it be over compressed. You follow what I mean? So again, listen to the top end of this. Okay, so hopefully you can hear that difference. Again, it is pretty subtle here, okay? But again, it's just that little extra. It's just it's a slight amount. Some people would say it doesn't make enough of a difference to even bother. I wouldn't say that, because again, we're doing everything in small amounts. We're adding a little bit of tonal difference to the overheads. We're adding a little bit of tonal difference to the lead vocals with these different kinds of hardware emulations. We're adding a little bit of difference here with the bass. We're going to add a little bit of difference with the rhythm guitars in a second. And the accumulative effect of that is going to make the mix sound a little more alive and have a little bit more of a unique flavor to it. So now when I bring in our grit track, hopefully you heard it right there. When I turned it on, you hear automatically it gets a little bit brighter, okay? So now when I bring that into the context of the mix, and again, how well you'll be able to hear this over the video, I'm not sure, but trust me, it's there. And again, you have to kind of, again, experiment with this. You have to play with this stuff. It's not something you're going to necessarily grasp right out of the gate. Okay, these are a little bit more advanced techniques here.
The fact of me being different is that you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand and smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think.
I can absolutely hear the bass cut now. I'm going to do this again so you can hear it. When I take away the compressor, I'm going to start with the compressor off, okay? Try to focus on the bass. It's so important that we do this in the context of the mix. Try to just close your eyes and focus on the bass. When I kick that compressor on, you'll instantly hear that compressor that bass kind of jump forward and gets a little bit brighter. It cuts a little bit better, okay? It's subtle, but focus on it. I'm going to let it play quite a bit from the beginning so your ears get used to hearing the bass without that compressor, and then I'll jump it in. And then once I jump it in, I'll stop it. Okay, what I tell people as a trick, and the way I learned how to do this, quite honestly, is don't look at the screen. Shut your eyes. Close your eyes and focus on the bass. Try to tune everything else out and focus on the bass. This is something you're going to have to learn how to do if you want to be the next level or have more professional sounding mixes as an engineer anyway. You have to be able to close your eyes with a whole mix playing and focus in on an instrument and almost tune out what else is going on around that bass guitar. And again, it just comes with practice. You can do this, okay? So just close your eyes, try to focus on the bass. I will let it play without the compressor for a good amount of time, and then I'm going to kick it on, and then as soon as I kick it on and let it play for a couple of seconds, I'll shut it off and see if you can hear that bass kind of jump up in the mix a little bit more, stand a little more tall, and and cut through a little bit better. Okay? So close your eyes. Are you closing your eyes? Here we go.
I can remember you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see.
Okay, did you hear the bass come to life? It's almost like it was a little hard to hear until I turned that compressor on, and instantly it got brighter. Okay, and it got a little more cut, a little bit more gritty, cut through the guitars. Okay, I'm going to do it again. Shut your eyes. I'll do it one more time. This is important. Okay, because once you can get your ears and your brain to kind of tie together and hear this stuff for the first time, trust me when I tell you it is going to change the way you approach mixing. It did for me, and that's why I created this series, because again, in order to be effective with this kind of style of mixing, and this is a style, analog plugins, and to get good at it, it's these little things that make the difference. Okay, so close your eyes. Here we go. I'll let it play for a bit. I'll turn it on and then I'll stop it so you know where I turned it on, and hopefully you hear it. Here we go.
And remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what.
Okay, did you hear it? It didn't get louder. It got brighter. The tone changed. Okay? That's what we're listening for. And I know I keep harping on this. I'm assuming that you guys are new to this, okay? If you're not, and you're one of my more advanced people, I apologize. But again, you know this is how my style of teaching is. I want you to understand this. I want you to send me an email 3 months from now after you buy this product and say, this was revolutionary for you. Because it was for me. It changed the way I thought about mixing. Okay, so the bass now cuts through more. Yes, it's more compressed, but it has a different tone now. It stands out a little bit more, okay? So what have we done so far? We've done the overheads. We gave it a little love on the EQ. We did the bass. We gave it a little love with the compressor. On the lead vocals, we did EQ and compression. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you in this section, again, is another compressor that I like to use on electric distorted guitars. Even though I think these guitars sound really good. I don't even know if I would keep it on this mix, but I want to show it to you anyway. Is the LA3A, and I use the one by Waves, the CLA3A. I also have the Universal Audio versions, and to be honest with you, I like the Waves versions better. Okay, and I'm going to do this. We have 2 electric guitars, just the rhythm, not the leads, and I'm going to do this on the left and on the right. Okay. These are wonderful compressors. Okay, so I'm going to pin this one, and I'm going to open them both up so we can see them both. Because we have 2 electric guitars, I'm going to dial both these in. I'm going to turn down the gain a little bit to start so we don't blast our ears out here. And let's just listen to what we have going on here. And again, I'm going to try to achieve about 3 dB of compression because, again, distorted electric guitars already got a lot of compression. So let's see what this does to our electric guitars.
You never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. You'll see me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change as far as I can remember. You never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this.
Okay, so we're achieving about 3 dB of compression on each, a little bit more. And what this compressor is adding to it, again, it's adding a little bit more top end to it. It's also compressing it, and I'm not even sure if I really like this, to be honest. These guitars sound pretty good on their own. And here's an example where I just don't use this on every electric guitar because I've done it in other mixes. I try it and see if I like the way it sounds. I like what it's doing to the top end. Again, it's getting it to cut a little bit more. It's separating things a little bit more from the bass. But I think it may be over compressing things a little bit. And even if I do a little less compression, then I'm not getting that high end kind of cut that I want. So this might be an example where I may not use this, but I'm going to play with it a little bit. I'm going to try to do a little less compression and just see if I can get the tone to cut a little bit better.
How this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. You'll see me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change as far as I can remember. You never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind.
Okay, that sounds a little bit better to me. I'm not compressing nearly as much, only about a dB or so, which is good. It doesn't sound over compressed now. Before, I think I was compressing a little too heavily. But what I'm listening for again, and what I like, is I like the way the top end cuts, but it doesn't get piercing. It just kind of cuts it through a little bit more. Okay, so again, what I'm listening for is the top end of the guitar. So I'm going to start with it off, and then I'll bring it in and just hear again how the guitars get a little more clarity, a little more bite, but not harsh. It's not louder. It's just a different shift in tone. And again, could you do this on an EQ? You could, but you're not going to get the same results because an EQ, when you start boosting that top end on electric guitars, will tend to get a little bit too bitey. This keeps it a little bit more round on the top end, but it gets a little brighter because the compression portion of this is rounding the top end so it doesn't get too spiky. Okay, that's why I'm using the compressor instead of an EQ. So we'll start with it off, and then I'll turn it on. Again, close your eyes. I'm going to trust you to close your eyes so you don't see me unbypassing the two plugins. But I'll let it play for a bit, and then I'm going to turn it on, okay? See if you can close your eyes and see if you can pick up where I'm turning on the compressors.
I can remember you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expect.
Okay, did you hear it? Did you hear kind of the guitar kind of almost seems like it lifted up a little bit, more so on the right side than the left side, because that riff kind of wasn't too much of a difference, but on the right side, that other rhythm guitar kind of popped a little more. Let's try it again. Close your eyes. Go ahead. Here we go.
Expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you.
Did you hear it? Much more clarity, okay? At least that's what I hear in the control room. Again, if it doesn't come across on the video like this, and I'll know when I edit this if it does, but it's probably a little more subtle because of compression in the video. Trust me, get an LA3A compressor like this, demo this from Waves, play around with your distorted electric guitars, and you'll find, and you can use these on acoustics as well, but I like them on electric guitars. It gives it that little bit of bite. It gives it a little more cut without even touching the volume. And it seems like it's a little bit more polished sounding to me. Okay? So again, subtle, but it works. It makes these guitars cut a little bit more. And this is a guitar-driven song, so we want that. Okay? So that's what we're going to just finish up on this section. So again, just in quick summary, we're using selective pieces of hardware in our analog studio to kind of enhance some of our tracks that we want to give a little bit of special uniqueness to. The lead vocal, certainly almost on every mix, I'll do this on the lead vocal because that is the most important instrument. Then depending on the mix, I'm looking at what are the other elements of the mix that you want to help drive the song. In a rock song like this, it's certainly the electric guitars. That's why we gave a little love to the electric guitars. The overheads to get the snare to pop a little bit more. And again, there's several ways to do this, but that was one effective way to do this, to give it a little bit of different, unique sounds. And the bass guitar to get it to cut a little bit more from the guitars. And so now we have some extra flavor to the mix, or if you think of this as like a soup, some extra spices in the soup that weren't there before. Okay, now if I were to take away, can I do this? I can probably play this mix back, and because we don't have that many plugins, I can turn off the Sheps, I can turn these off by hand. I'm not going to do it on the vocals, just on the instrumentation. I took away the Shep 73 on the overheads, I took away the LA2 on the bass, and I took away the LA3 on the guitars. Again, shut your eyes again. I'm going to play back this piece. I'm going to turn these plugins on one at a time and hear how the whole mix shifts a little bit in tone. Okay? And see if you can pick it out. Here we go.
Yes, I can remember you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind.
Okay, did you hear it? Now, some of the plugins made a little pop when we turned them on, so it might have cued you off, but I turned them on, turned them off, and turned them back on again. And if you, hopefully you can, again, open up your eyes now and rewind the video and watch me do that again. You can hear that the mix gets a little bit more clarity and gets a little bit more thick sounding and a little bit more bitey sounding all at the same time, but it sounds pleasant to the ear. It gives those tracks a little bit of uniqueness. Okay, so I know I've said that a bunch of times. Rewind this video, go back and do the examples where you're listening again, and use this section over and over again until you really get it, because it really is going to help you with your mix. I promise you'll help you take your mixing to a whole different place. Okay, so now come back for the next section. We're going to start talking about reverbs and delays to give this mix a little more size, and I'll see you in the next section.